What did you say? This presentation deals heavily with the idea of the term what and its many translations and how these translations go about reshaping or redefining what it is that's being said. So, to start things off, what is the term what? What is the significance of this? Well, this is the first term that we see in the story of Beowulf. It's the first word that the reader is met with, and this often sets the tone of the story and will kind of shape perhaps the pace of that as well. We're going to get into that a little bit later on. But the subject, what is a subject to debate among scholars? This has been debated since the poem has been transcribed and translated, and it's continued to be debated to today. It sparked up a lot of controversy in the literary world, and we're going to dive into that later as well. But what is a very loose term, very open to interpretation, and these interpretations are something that are worthy of exploration. So how can you define what? The direct definition has been lost in translation, unfortunately. It's one of the many forgotten words that we come to find in the exchange of various languages, and this is very common in the oral tradition, which is likely Beowulf's origins to begin with, which is commonly a lot of these Anglo-Saxon stories were passed down orally and then transcribed much later on. But commonly, what is considered an interjection. And this interjection is an idea such as hey, or listen, or things of that nature, similar construct. But because of the loss of definition, what is incredibly open to interpretation, and we're going to explore that here in just a little bit. But what is the significance of the translation? What makes the translation significant? What is significant in setting the tone of Beowulf, with this being the first word that the reader is met with? It's going to kind of formulate the mood as to how this goes about gaining the reader's attention. The way in which what is translated is going to just inevitably impact the reader's experience. But the idea of how this is translated brings up the debate that we commonly come across when looking into these translations, which is the notion of the argument that's in favor or against what as an interjection. So, when exploring and looking for sources as to who might be in favor of what as the interjection is what we most commonly find this translated as. It's listen, hey. It's something that just abruptly comes out and begins the story. But when searching for somebody who is in favor of that, one of the most famous examples that we found is J.R.R. Tolkien when he began his translation of Beowulf. And in his translation, it favors the idea of this interjectional nature. Tolkien interpreted the term as a striking note before the poem. With this in mind, Tolkien, he kind of translated what as low. It's like a striking note just coming through the crowd to gain the attention. It's a very, very abrupt, very just instantaneous, ready, set, go kind of means of acquiring the audience's attention. But this is common among the interjection notion that just it grabs and demands the attention of the audience. And in terms of oppositions, an article published in the London Evening notes that Tolkien translates what as a command, choosing low, as we previously mentioned. But last year, historical linguist Dr. George Walkden argued that the word should translate merely as how. This changes the structure of the sentence in its entirety. This translation is unique in the sense that this now creates how we have heard the might of kings, as opposed to listen, we have heard the mights of kings. This is interesting in the sense that it doesn't directly command its audience, but rather it just dips the audience into it. But in continuing the exploration of the opposition of the interjection translation of Hwaet, in journalist Claire Kelly's article on the phrase, she notes Seamus Heaney's translation of the term as so. This term, so, it's not so much an interjection as well, it just gently asks the reader to join the story by piquing the curiosity. See, Kelly observes that Heaney actually just used a period, choosing to use the word so as more of a transition word that is meant to mimic Anglo-Saxon diction and indicate the continuation of the conversation. And within this article, Kelly goes on to explain how Heaney viewed this as a more accurate form of how the Anglo-Saxons communicated during the civilization in which they existed. He said that as opposed to just directly commanding the attention, this sense of so just gathers the attention, as opposed to just coming out and basically screaming, "Hey, come listen to what I have to say." It just piques the curiosity. But Kelly argues in favor of Hwaet as part of a complete exclamatory sentence, and this is what you see when these authors use phrases such as so or how. It becomes a complete and complex sentence, as opposed to one exclamation followed by the proclamation. So what is the significance of this word? Hwaet, being the first word the reader is met with in Beowulf, will ultimately set the tone and pace of the story. How the word is interpreted greatly affects how the reader enters that story. And that's a lot of what we're experiencing in the mentioning of the interjection versus the opposition of that theory. But Hwaet as an interjection, how does that affect the story in its entirety? The interjectional use of the term commands attention. It's very abrupt, very sudden, and it just comes out of nowhere. And this commanding does not allow the reader to enter the story willingly. It's rather, it takes the attention from the reader instead of the reader being curious about entering into this tale. What will this tale do for me? Instead, it's, hey, come listen. The interjection makes its presence known instantly, and Tolkien's Lo, for example, calls out to its audience, breaking through the crowd. This is like the striking of a note. You know, you can equate that to like a bell tower. It's going to disrupt this crowd, but still bring their attention through in such a commanding way. But in opposing the interjection, interpretations of Hwaet, such as Heaney's so or Walkden's how, create a less demanding approach to gaining the audience's attention. And this creates a more approachable tone that allows action to rise more naturally. It gently dips its audience down into this. Rather than listen, we have heard of the might of kings, the reader is met with, so we have heard the might of the kings, or how we have heard of the might of the kings, which appears, it's going to appeal more to one's curiosity. And this translation is significant in the sense that it does that as opposed to just commanding the attention. So to conclude, the single word holds greater significance than one might think in considering the overall tonality of the story. How this word is translated deals heavily with how the reader is going to be thrown into the world of Beowulf, and how one might experience that pace from that initial slinging into this realm. The interjection creates a rushed and commanding tone, and I feel like this is going to carry over through the reader's experience. It's like, listen, hey, and then the reader is going to be like, oh, okay, I have to really focus and pay attention and get through this. This is serious. Where the looser interpretations allow Beowulf to kind of slowly gain traction. How a text is translated can greatly affect the experience in which it is read, and that is a significant thing that I have learned throughout this course, and I'm continuing to experience in literature today. Thank you.